This is the Kia EV6, Kia's latest entry into EVs, representing their next generation of electric cars. And this is a true upgrade over their initial EVs with lots of changes for the better. I had a week to drive and test this vehicle, and before we get into anything detailed, I think Kia did a great job here, and this is definitely a car I would recommend. But for me, someone that drives an EV every day, it felt like there were some things missing. Specifically, this is the Kia EV6 GT line rear-wheel drive. So this is the top trim of the EV6, just rear-wheel drive instead of all-wheel drive. And with this GT line trim, you can option this paint color called Steel Matte Gray, which is easily my top choice if I were to buy one. Usually you need some sort of wrap or stealth PPF to achieve this matte look. And I think the fact that Kia is offering this as a stock paint color is awesome. And as spec, this will run you about $51,200 before taxes and shipping. Some more basic specs here. This car has a 77.4 kilowatt hour battery, so actually a bit less than comparable EVs in this class. The Model Y is around 82 kilowatt hours, while the Mach-E is at 88. This trim also has 310 miles of rated range, also very solid. I generally don't recommend an EV to someone that takes a lot of trips or drives their car a lot to get an EV with under 300 miles of range. And I'm happy to see more EVs are hitting that mark. I didn't do any road tripping or range testing with this car, but I can tell you it is incredibly efficient. I was seeing close to 4 miles per kilowatt hour in most of my driving, which is top notch for EVs, which is exactly how Kia gets away with using this smaller battery. But probably the most important spec here is the eGMP battery platform. This is the same platform as the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and the Genesis GV60. Most EVs on the market right now are actually on a 400 volt architecture. Tesla, Ford, Nissan, and more all use 400 volt batteries, which is fine, but 800 volts has some clear advantages, especially when it comes to charging. Because of that higher voltage battery pack, you actually don't need as much current to achieve higher charging speeds, which means this car can achieve up to 250 kilowatt peak charging rates and also sustain that for a longer period of time. In my testing, I plugged in at around 20% at this EVgo station, and charging quickly ramped up to around 235 kilowatts and actually sustained that power till around 60% when it started to slow down a bit. But overall, in just 20 minutes, I went from 20% to 90%, which is just crazy fast. So if charging speed and road trip capabilities are a priority for you, this is definitely a car to have on your short list. For AC charging, you can hit a max of 11 kilowatts, so right in line with other EVs at the moment. And most home chargers are only about 7 kilowatts anyway, so the EV6 has no problem with charging overnight at that rate. While we're on charging, probably the weirdest part here is just the charge port location. Most vehicles keep it on the driver's side, but Kia has elected to put it on the rear passenger side, so really odd spot. Generally, I prefer having it on the driver's side, especially to make plugging and unplugging quicker, so you don't have to walk around the whole vehicle to get to where you need to plug in. But probably the best part about charging is what you hear when you plug in.
Charging started.
And I'd be lying if that didn't freak me out a little bit the first time I heard it. And honestly, this isn't a bad feature. It seems a little quirky, but I find myself checking the car or peeking in the window all the time to make sure that charging is actually started. So hearing that audio feedback is actually quite helpful here. And you can disable it if you're not a fan of it. Size-wise, this car is a cross between the Model 3 and Model Y, so you definitely don't sit up as high as a true SUV. And this feels more like a normal car when you're driving around. I noticed immediately when I hopped in that headroom is a bit tight, but if you do adjust the seats down, you can accommodate that. I am 6'4", so this isn't gonna be an issue for everyone, but just something to be aware of, that the headspace isn't as much as you might like. As for driving, this car is really comfortable as well. I immediately noticed just how much quieter and insulated the cabin was when I drove it. Significantly better than my 2019 Model 3, and it really feels more luxury just for that reason. The one thing I noticed immediately when I started driving is that lack of punch you get in some other EVs. I couldn't quite nail this down, but it feels like there's a slight delay in between hitting the accelerator pedal and that motor actually kicking in to push the car forward. It honestly felt like a gas car in some ways, and that's not how I like EVs to be. I want that instant feedback, that instant torque. Keep in mind this is the rear-wheel drive trim, and I talked to some other owners that have the all-wheel drive, and they said the feedback is immediate. It's got a lot more power, so if you are looking for that performance, I definitely recommend the all-wheel drive. The steering wheel is also nicely shaped for long-distance driving. It has that flat bottom that is really comfortable for resting your hands on. Very glad they took this route instead of going full yoke like Tesla. There's also a heads-up display, which is nice, and this is certainly a personal preference here, whether you like this or not. I'm generally not a fan, but I left it on the whole time I was driving, and it was actually nice to see that information up front and displayed as I was driving, and I didn't have to look away at a screen or anything. There's also blind spot cameras when you turn on the turn signals, so that's nice. As for those driver assist features or autopilot-like features, Kia has adaptive cruise control and lane keep assist, but the problem with these I notice is that there's no quick way to enable both of them. You have to enable adaptive cruise first, which will maintain speed and slow down for cars in front of you, and then enable lane centering after that. I messed around with a bunch of settings and I couldn't figure this out. Maybe there is a way to activate both at once, but there was no easy way I could tell. But once those are on, the features worked wonderfully. I used it anytime I was on the highway, definitely made driving a lot more stress-free and easier. Probably the biggest difference I noticed from Tesla's autopilot is it's just generally less aggressive. It does have lane change as well, which is nice, but it's definitely not as aggressive as Tesla's system. But that's actually a good thing because Tesla will just throw you in a lane sometimes and swerve back if it sees a car, which can be a little jarring. For navigation, there is a built-in system on this Kia, and you do have to use that if you want it to route through chargers. So if you're navigating to somewhere far away, I recommend using the in-screen navigation so it actually plans charging stops for you. But for shorter trips around town or just general navigation, there is Android Auto and Apple CarPlay available for whatever your favorite driving apps are. As for stop-and-go traffic, there is one-pedal driving here, which I appreciate. The only problem is Kia's system uses a system similar to a lot of other EVs I've noticed, where the paddle shifters have been converted into regen pedals almost. So you can adjust the amount of regen you're feeling with those paddle shifters. I'm not sure how I feel about this because when I set regen strength, generally it's a set it and forget it. I don't want it to be changing all the time while I'm driving. It will also switch you out of this one pedal drive mode, especially when you're parking. So I switched into reverse to back into a spot, and when I let off the brake, I wasn't expecting the car to move, but it had switched back to that coast mode and slowly moved my car back, which can be a little bit jarring if you aren't expecting that. Generally, I just want this to stay consistent when you set that. I don't want it to move around or change when you switch into reverse or anything like that. I'd rather have just a consistent driving experience. But if you are parking and don't want to do it yourself, there's actually a park assist feature built into the key. I tried doing this while shooting, but realized that you actually need to be pretty close to the car, which is a great safety feature in my opinion, so people aren't controlling their car across the parking lot. But if you're within a few feet of the car, you can turn on this park assist mode, and this is nice for backing in and out of small spaces or moving your car around just a few feet if you need to without hopping in the car. If you are controlling the car manually, the turning radius is also really impressive. I actually found myself oversteering to get into spots, and it feels like a way more compact car than it is. When you are driving, Kia has gone the route of some other EV makers and actually added an artificial sound of the cabin while driving. There's 3 options for this. But personally, I left this off most of the time. I like my EV experience pretty vanilla. I like it quiet. I like one-pedal driving, all the normal EV stuff. And I think this speaks to the design language of the car as a whole. There's just a lot of quirks here that are odd to me as a daily EV driver, but that's obviously not who Kia is selling this car to. Most people buying an EV today are doing it for the first time. So on top of faux engine noise, you've also got things like a start-stop button, a touchscreen that beeps when you touch it, a very normal looking front hood that shows all the guts of the car, even if they did stick a tiny frunk up here. But there's just a lot of things that may appeal to your first time EV buyer to make it feel more familiar. Luckily, most of these are just software features that can be adjusted or completely turned off. But by default, when you hop in this car, it acts like a gas vehicle, just with a little bit smoother acceleration and, the fact that you charge it instead of fueling up at a gas station. But those things aside, it really is a great car. The design is awesome. I'm so glad OEMs are making EVs cool looking instead of the eco looking EVs of the past. This is an aggressive, sporty crossover design that I doubt you would even know is an EV without knowing ahead of time. And it's practical too. There's an unexpected amount of space on the interior. I fit just fine in the back seat. and overall it's just a comfortable cabin. But they've also done some smart EV features because it is electric. They've added a 120 volt standard wall outlet in the back here, which I appreciate. This is a feature I feel like every EV should have, especially when you're literally sitting on the largest battery you probably own. And it would be nice to use that to power things other than the car when it is stationary. Kia also takes this a step further with a 120 volt on the exterior of the car, or V2L, vehicle to load. The car comes with this J1772 to wall outlet adapter, which when plugged in turns your charge port into an outlet. So you can power things that are outside the car and just leave it sitting there locked if you need to. This is nice if you lose power at home and maybe need to power small appliances while the power is out, but you can also charge other EVs this way. I hooked up my Tesla with the mobile adapter and was able to trickle charge it at around 12 amps, which is exactly what I get out of a standard wall outlet. I would love to see Kia take this a step further with some vehicle to home capabilities, but right now being limited to 15 amp output will limit that. So overall, I recommend this car. It's clear that this car was designed for people that are used to driving ICE vehicles, just with some extra features that remind you it's an EV. And this really feels like a transition vehicle for Kia. They're clearly committed to making a great EV with that crazy fast charging and the efficiency this car has, but there's still some things hanging around from gas cars that they haven't quite gotten rid of yet. Again, I want to stress that that is complete personal preference. Some people like that stuff, but as somebody that is used to driving an EV, there's a lot of things here that aren't completely necessary. The price point is right in line with other EVs as well, which makes it pretty attractive. The EV6 starts at around $41,000, but as spec'd in this video, just over $51,000. Personally, I would recommend at least upgrading to the wind trim. That's what will get you 300 miles. And if you want the extra performance or that punch that you get out of EVs typically, I would also recommend an all-wheel drive trim. But that'll do it for this review. Let me know what you think down in the comments, what you like about the EV6, what you don't like about it. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? I want to hear about it. Thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.